So we have another interview here at Fever Radio as part of the Together We Can project. Very happy to have Dr. Gregor back and giving us some more information, some great information about nutrition, health, and all the studies that are available out there that can give us that knowledge, that scientific basis that we can use as a rock to kind of move forward with. So a little bit about Dr. Gregor, a founding member and fellow of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Michael Gregor, MD, is a physician, New York Times best-selling author, and internationally recognized speaker on nutrition. He has videos on more than 2,000 health topics freely available at nutritionfacts.org, with new videos and articles uploaded almost every day. Dr. Gregor has lectured at the Conference on World Affairs, testified before Congress, and was invited as an expert witness in the defense of Oprah Winfrey in the infamous meat defamation trial. He's a graduate of Cornell University School of Agriculture and Tufts University School of Medicine. 3 of his recent books, How Not to Die, The How Not to Die Cookbook, and How Not to Diet, all became instant New York Times bestsellers. And his latest book, How to Survive a Pandemic, was just released in May, I guess, of 2022. Am I correct in saying that?
Who knows?
Yeah.
They all blend together.
Okay, great. And it's worth noting that all the proceeds that Dr. Gregor receives from the sales of his books go directly to charity. Dr. Gregor, welcome back to Fever Radio.
I am so glad to be back.
Thank you so much. So, Dr. Gregor, we've got only just half an hour with you, and I want to lock into the various questions that we've got. We maybe got too many. On the last interview, we did talk a fair bit about antioxidants. You mentioned very interestingly that ginger dried has more antioxidants, or a particular kind of antioxidant in particular, than the fresh kind. And also we spoke about Armla, and I think locally here in the shops that surround Fever Radio, pretty much Armla powder was sold out for several days following the interview. So great stuff. One thing that did come to mind that I didn't address with you in the last interview is, have you seen any studies on the antioxidant content of sumac?
Oh, I have not. Yeah, no, I don't know what sumac. I wonder if there's any just looking to see if there's any randomized controlled clinical trials on sumac. It's not something I've looked into. Oh, there's 58. That's interesting.
A very popular herb. Well, herb, I say, it's a fruit, actually. Dried berries, aren't they? So very popular in the Middle East and Turkey and
cool. Well, I should do a video about it.
I would love you to do that, to be honest. So I've looked into the antioxidant content, 3,500 foods, I think it is list. I couldn't see it on there. Where Armla is one of the clear winners, but it has a remarkable color. It's also, rather than a spice, it's a berry, isn't it, like Armla? So a fruit, which makes it more digestible, I think, to us, at least in the raw form. So it would be interesting to know, really, if there was.
Yeah, I'm looking at a recent study out of Iran. Took 84 patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, randomized to double-blind placebo-controlled trial, 2 grams of sumac a day. Isn't that a lot? I don't know how much people use.
I could easily use 2 grams, actually.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, 12 weeks, and compared to placebo, significantly decrease in liver scarring and inflammation. Oh, and drops in inflammatory markers. Drops in improvements in long-term blood sugar control. That's exciting. Wow. I think I've got to do a video about it, and it's all going to be thanks to you.
Oh, well, thank you. You've got another video then. So that's already a good start.
That is cool. Yeah, I don't know why I neglected the thing. All right, I'm making myself a note right now. All right, sumac it is.
Lovely. Okay, so sumac seems to be a helpful thing, but we don't have enough.
Oh, I mean, that one study, but who knows? Every other study says it'll, who knows? Well, it's important to put everything in context. And that's what I do. And so I will look. There's only 58 studies, 58 clinical randomized controlled trials on sumac published, at least in the English language, in the medical literature. So, I mean, that's an easy breezy afternoon.
So I mean, with regards to the antioxidants, because we did speak about spices, obviously, like ginger, turmeric, other spices or herbs like cinnamon, tend to contain a lot of antioxidants as well. The thing about these, however, is that in their raw form, I mean, cinnamon's a bark, ginger, it's hard to get a lot of that in, to be honest. There's a limit to how much you'd be able to digest. But fruits seem, something that we could get in quite a large quantity and take the benefits from. So I was quite interested in the antioxidant content of things that are fruit related, let's say. Now,
right, so spices on a gram per gram basis have more antioxidants than anything, but it's easier to eat a half kilo of nuts than it is to eat a half kilo of nutmeg, right? I mean, so that's where the berries really come in, which may exceed on a per serving basis even some of the spices.
And I know you recommend, don't you, that we should make use of spices, albeit in small quantities, because you get so much bang for your buck, don't you?
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, just now that we're talking, I feature a new spice I encourage everyone to go to Indian spice stores to get in my upcoming book, How Not to Age. Papali. Have you ever heard of papali? Long pepper?
Yeah, very strong. It's a very overwhelming ingredient.
Strong, well, but it has strong, overwhelming health benefits.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
So actually, feature. I forget which chapter. I can look it up. But yeah, that's it. So there'll be another run on the stores when the book comes out. I'm not sure when the UK edition is coming out.
Okay, and another question that comes up time and time again. In fact, I was doing a quiz on the breakfast show this morning, and it's a term that keeps on coming up, which is good fat. And often that gets tied into people just say you should be eating good fats, but there's not often a follow-up as to what that actually means.
Right.
If you pressure people, or if you kind of ask them what they're on about, generally it comes down to olive oil with the Mediterranean diet, or fish. So I'd like to ask you, what is good fat from what you understand, from what you've seen in all the studies? And
the most important thing is the source. It's the source that matters, right? And so rather than talking about chemical components like monounsaturated fats, it depends where you're getting that from. And so when you're talking about good carbs, good proteins, good fats, what are because food comes as a package deal, right? You just can't get one, a bit or two here or there. It all comes together. You say, well, what are the best sources of fats, the healthiest sources of fats? And those are whole food plant sources such as nuts, seeds, nut butter, seed butters, and avocados. Those are really the healthiest sources. At least nuts certainly associated with increase in longevity, decrease in all-cause mortality. Nut eaters live significantly longer, and it's not just observational studies. There's randomized controlled trials, like the famous PREDIMED study, showing that those randomized to increase their nut intake from a half handful a day to a full handful a day, cut the risk of stroke risk in half. So not eating a palm full of nuts a day may effectively double your stroke risk based on thousands of people randomized for a period of about 3 to 4 years.
Okay. I think I saw somewhere that just a handful of nuts is the equivalent of jogging however many number of miles a week in terms of your heart health.
And it's that particular study was just 3 times a week, a palm full of nuts, 3 times a week or more. And so it's not even necessarily every day. And so, so that's why nuts and seeds are part of my daily dozen list of kind of the healthiest of healthy foods. I encourage people to get into somehow fit into their daily diet.
Okay. But when we're talking about these good fats then, but there is a limit to how much we should be taking in of them, I guess. It's not like you can have an unlimited amount and the benefits continue to increase, right? There's a meta-analysis of cohort studies on, for example, nut consumption found that it really does max out at that ounce a day. So eating 2 ounces a day doesn't give you twice the benefit. In fact, doesn't appear to give you any more benefit. In fact, even every other day, an ounce, you'd probably max out on how much you can benefit from them. I encourage people to eat their whole food sources of fat with their greens, because so many of the beneficial compounds within dark green leafy vegetables are fat soluble.
These carotenoid phytonutrients, like the lutein, zeaxanthin, important for brain health and eye health. These you will pass right through you unless you have fat in your stomach at the same time as these greens.
Just because those are based upon drawing blood and finding that the nutrients are in the blood when you've got this additional source of fat. But of course, if you look at a diabetic, they've got more sugar in their blood. Because of a kind of a backup of the fat that's in their system. The fat prevents the sugar getting to where it needs to go. So isn't it possible that the fat in the nuts is just kind of slowing down the absorption of these various nutrients, phytochemicals, and antioxidants into the body? Is that a possibility, or is that not? Is that thinking?
So the fat is actually boosting the bioavailability into your bloodstream. And then you're correct in saying that insulin resistance, the cause of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, is caused by fat inside your liver and muscles, which is the primary users of blood sugar in the body, such that they don't respond to insulin appropriately, and blood sugar builds up in the blood. But critically important, it's not just any fat. I mean, talking about good fat, bad fat, it's specifically saturated fat. In fact, you can take muscle cells in a petri dish and kind of, to exclude all other variables, and you can drip, a palmitic acid, which is primary saturated fat, and meat, dairy, and junk on these cells, and they become insulin resistant, don't accept glucose, whereas you drip something like fat from olives or fats from nuts, you don't see that same kind of effect. So it's not just all fat increasing one's insulin resistance and risk of type 2 diabetes and increased blood sugars, but specifically the saturated fats and also trans fats. Although, at least here in the US, trans fats have been eliminated from the food supply. I'm not sure what's happening in the UK.
Okay, so the important takeaway from this is if you're eating greens, or vegetables generally, which are rich in nutrients, antioxidants, etc., have them with a source of fat, and you'll get better absorption into the body. That's the takeaway.
This has to be in your stomach at the same time. Yep.
Okay, great. So what would you say is the single most detrimental food for health in the common diet? And if you were to exclude just one thing, what would it be? What would your recommendation be?
So, we don't have to guess. We have the largest, most comprehensive study on human risk factors for disease and death in history, the Global Burden of Disease Study, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that found that the number one cause of death for humanity is humanity's diet, kills more people than anything else. And then what is the single worst thing about humanity's diet? Excess sodium consumption.
Oh, wow.
We're eating too much salt. That's the worst thing. Kills more people than, it's worse than soda and processed meat and all the terrible things we hear about. It's actually sodium. And we're, at least in the States here, 70% of sodium intake is from processed foods. It's not like people are necessarily putting too much on at the dinner table or in the kitchen. It's coming from these prepackaged foods, which ramp up the sodium intake to get people to eat more of them. And that's actually because a high sodium intake is associated with so many different causes of death, such as, heart failure, liver failure, that it can, all long down the list, even autoimmune diseases. So if there was one thing we could do to improve our diet, actually would be try to decrease our salt intake, which for most people is decreasing their intake of processed foods.
Right. Okay. Interesting. I thought we were going to go a different way with that question. That's so interesting. So sodium, or salts rather, sodium chloride is the number one food that we should be checking. It's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, you couldn't actually consume a table of salt by itself. In fact, it might just kill you. I think from what
it would actually kill you. Yes. I mean, there's actually a very small safety margin. In fact, that used to be a way people killed themselves in kind of ancient China. That was a preferred method of suicide. It actually doesn't take much. But what we could do instead of using salt, if you really crave that salty taste, I mean, ideally, what we do is we decrease sodium intake in our diet. And at first, everything tastes like cardboard, and you're like, I can't live a life like this. I don't care if I live longer and healthier. I mean, it's just I don't have the pleasure in life in my food. But amazing thing happens within a few weeks. Your taste buds actually adapt. Your palate adapts. And then all of a sudden, the food that you tasted salted to taste before is actually too salty. You actually prefer lower salt food. And they've done this experiment after experiment. And so you just have to get over that hump. And then eventually the best of both worlds, where it tastes great and you get to live longer. That's what healthy eating is all about.
Okay, great. I've actually had that experience, in fact, where I've been off salt entirely for several months, and on coming back to regular foods, they just taste remarkably salty.
Yeah. It's and same thing with fat, same thing with sugar. If you start, ratcheting down the amount of sugar you put in your tea or something, then all of a sudden you go back to the original. It's just, it's too sweet. You actually prefer less sweetness. So that's definitely the healthiest way to do it. In the meantime, there's a salt substitute called potassium chloride, which, unless you have some kind of kidney disease, which inhibits your ability to excrete excess potassium, is safe and been actually shown to decrease high blood pressure and actually decrease death rates for people who switched even to half and half sodium chloride, potassium chloride. So that's a powerful intervention that people can use as well.
It's interesting. We have this entire focus on sugar, as empty calories and of being all of the evils of bad health or what have you. But in fact, there's something called salts, which we use very regularly, don't think about, is an empty calorie as well, and just might kill you.
No calories, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So the empty calorie issue is really just about kind of you're excluding. There's only a certain many calories you're going to eat during the day. And so by eating the empty calories, you're just really, it's the opportunity cost of excluding other healthy foods. So it's really the worst part about sugar is, you're not eating, instead, you're not eating a piece of fruit or something where you actually get some nutrition.
Okay, great. What would you say, we talked about the most detrimental food then. So what would you say is the most single healthful food, common food that someone could add?
It would have to be greens, dark green leafy vegetables, particularly cruciferous vegetables. So that'd be like kale, collards, cauliflower, cabbage, bok choy, that kind of thing. That's really the healthy mustard greens. Healthiest food on the planet in terms of nutrition per calorie. Nothing can come close.
Oh, interesting. In fact, we have a dish called sarg, which is a very green dish.
Yeah.
Which is full of mustard greens, in fact. So.
I love it.
Great. So now you spend a lot of time obviously working through all the studies that are available to do with nutrition and health. Nutritionfacts.org was set up to disseminate that kind of information for the general public, people like me. What percentage of studies can be trusted, Dr. Greger? Because we understand that a lot of studies today are sponsored by industry that have an incentive for the studies to have a certain result. So just for our knowledge, how much can we actually trust these studies, and how do you differentiate between studies that are valid or biased?
It really depends on what you're looking at. So there are certain industries that have just plowed money into research. Indeed, following the Tobacco Institute model, the tobacco industry was the one that started trying to kind of pervert the science by flooding the zone with studies with kind of a predetermined outcome, and to try to shift the balance of evidence in their favor. And the food industry has jumped on that same bandwagon. So if you look at something, for example, like dairy, most meta-analyses on dairy and bone health, for example, were written by or dairy industry employees or funded directly by dairy corporations. You see similar things with soda. You see similar conflicts of interest in kind of a variety of industries. Usually it's the more kind of here in the States, we have they're like taxes on producers. And so we have like a beef board, the National Cattlemen's Beef Board, and every single beef producer has to pay into this fund. So they accumulate tens of millions of dollars that they then spend on advertising. Same thing with the National Dairy Council, the United Egg Producers. And so they all pay in and then do kind of general advertising. So when you see that kind of scenario, then you unfortunately see attempts to kind of manipulate the scientific literature. Now, just because a study is necessarily funded by an entity that has a financial stake in the results doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad study. But you certainly have to take it with that grain of salt, and look at it with a discerning eye to make sure that it wasn't set up to to get some desired result in a way. So you have to really look at the materials and methods and kind of figure it out. But look, there are studies published by the apple producers and the nut producers and the watermelon promotion board. And does that mean that we shouldn't trust these studies? Well, we do have to make sure that they're done in a way where the outcome is actually usable and not just some kind of commercial spin.
So it's more about how the study's actually designed than
right. That really, and so what the financial incentive is just affects usually the design. It's rare actually to see like just outright data fraud where they just kind of make up numbers, or that happens, but usually research involves so many different people. Often there'll be a whistleblower. It's hard to keep a secret within a certain critical mass of people, and there'll be a whistleblower, and it'll actually come out that and anything that has public funding in the US, you can get Freedom of Information Act requests, and you actually see some of the communications with the researchers, and unfortunately too often you see that kind of kind of corrupting commercial influence. But most studies, if they're well designed, even if they're funded by somebody that cares about the results, you want to take it seriously.
Okay, so there's cholesterol obviously is a burning issue in the West. It seems as people get older, they seem to have high cholesterol. It seems to be very common predicament for most people in the West. And for historically, people have understood that eggs contain a lot of cholesterol. If you have high cholesterol, it wouldn't be a good idea to consume a lot of eggs. But there was a recent study relatively recent study that was published, which seems to create some confusion, because almost everybody I speak to today believes that eggs are healthy and don't impact your cholesterol levels. Can you just speak on that for a moment?
Even the majority of studies funded by the egg industry itself shows that it increases LDL cholesterol, which is the primary risk factor for the number one killer of Britons, the number one killer of Americans, that is heart disease. And so we need to decrease the LDL cholesterol level in our blood, ideally as low as possible. And we do that by eliminating or reducing as much as possible 3 components in our diet. Number 1, trans fats, number 2, saturated fats, and also dietary cholesterol. Actually, the impact of saturated fat is more than dietary cholesterol, but dietary cholesterol does have a role, particularly at lower intakes. And so the way the egg industry, for example, designs studies to show that eggs don't impact cholesterol is, they compare, for example, 4 eggs a day to 6 eggs a day. And actually at that level, you kind of max out your ability to absorb cholesterol. And so the curve kind of flattens out. And so there's really very little difference. But instead, if you compare to 0 eggs to 2 eggs a day, then there'd be a huge bump in cholesterol. So you could design a study to show that there's no effect. But it's just a matter of kind of maxing out one's cholesterol absorption capacity.
Okay, great. So the body of evidence shows that the cholesterol in eggs and the saturated fat and the other components will raise your cholesterol. I just want our listeners to know that for sure.
Yeah, and so that's the conclusion of the National Academy of Sciences, the most prestigious scientific body here in the States, and indeed part of our dietary guidelines, the 20 to 25 guidelines, is we should reduce our cholesterol intake as much as possible. That's the language, as much as possible. And since no one's holding a gun to our heads, and saying you have to eat this omelet, then that means we should try to avoid eggs, which is the most concentrated common source of cholesterol in the diet.
And what do you think of people? I know several who say that they need animal products in order to be healthful. So these are people who are basically plant-based, but will add in a tiny bit of animal products because they feel that they need that to be healthful. I can think of a couple of people who are white Europeans who say that if they don't consume eggs, they become pale as can be. What would you say to that?
I mean, that doesn't seem to make much physiological sense. But if people want to add a little bit back, I mean, that's not the concern is not with the people between the 95% healthy diet people and the 100% healthy diet. I mean, if that was our problem, I could retire. I'd be on a beach somewhere. Like, that is not the issue. The issue is people eating, 20% healthy foods. I mean, that's really where the average person is. I mean, they're just most calories are from these ultra processed foods, which really aren't even food these days. And so, whether people want to use some meat is kind of a flavoring or a condiment, as many kind of traditional cultures have used animal products. I mean, it may be difficult to even tease out any health differences between those two groups. It's this kind of westernized, imagining meals as just like a big hunk of steak or something that pushes healthy food to the side. That's the real issue we have to deal with.
Okay. What about milk and dairy products, which is massive in South Asian communities, and certainly Hindus and Sikhs see it as a very, very important part of the diet. How could Ayurveda have got it so wrong, or how could these cultures have got it so wrong?
Well, I mean, look, we didn't have the science. So, for example, Ayurveda, traditionally we're giving people heavy metals, literally lead, mercury, giving people mercury as therapeutic, and somehow kind of detoxifying it with cow pee or something. That's just, we now know that was not a good idea. And of course, it wasn't just those cultures around the world. Traditional cultures used lead and things to kind of pacify babies. I mean, it's really kind of scary when we look back at it. But now we have science to really say, well, wait a second, is this good? Is this bad? And we can often use some kind of traditional ancient wisdom to give us some ideas. For example, a recent Nobel Prize went to the person that figured out that we have this anti-malarial agent in wormwood, and they were giving people this kind of traditional Chinese herb for centuries before we figured out, oh my God, this is the most important the treatment we have for this disease that kills millions of people. Okay. So there's only kind of traditional wisdom can only go so far. The worst dairy product is ghee. It's because the boiling butterfat oxidizes the cholesterol, and as bad as dietary cholesterol is, oxidized cholesterol is more atherogenic, but more kind of artery hardening than regular cholesterol, and so so reducing ghee consumption. If there was one kind of dairy product that was the worst, that would be it. In the West here, we typically only see in kind of ultra processed creamers, like the shelf stable half and half. The reason it can sit on the shelf is because it's been ultra pasteurized, been heated to such high levels that kind of sterilizes, and so there's no bacteria left. And those high heats with the butter fat can create those same kind of oxidized cholesterol. But I mean, if you are boiling butter, you are just making massive amounts of it.
Right, remarkable, isn't it? Because ghee is literally one of the most celebrated foods in the Ayurvedic system. So very interesting. Okay,
so ghee is actually that's why we think there's such high rates of cardiovascular disease in the subcontinent of India, which has such relatively high, vegetarian rates. As many as maybe 40% of Indians are eating, meat-free diets. So why do they have such outrageous rates of cardiovascular disease? Ghee is the primary candidate.
Okay, interesting. That's definitely going to perk the ears of a lot of our listeners, I guess, and it's worth us exploring in more detail in another show. I know you've got no more time left for us, Dr. Gregor, so I'm going to thank you with all making the time for us today, and all that you've been able to give us in terms of information. One thing I did want to mention before you leave is that I saw one of your nutritionfacts.org videos on squatty potties.
Ah,
Which is something I've recommended to a number of different people in my life. And interestingly, your conclusions came out that it didn't really provide any additional benefit. The research kind of showed that. So I'm wondering, have you ever tried a squatty potty yourself? And also, have you seen the Amazon reviews for, a squatty potty? Have you seen what people are writing about their experience with it?
oh well, I mean, guys, it's hard to know what you can trust with Amazon reviews, but yeah, no, but the science shows you can get that same change in anal rectal angle that improves laxation by leaning forward. So instead of putting your legs up with a little stool, you can lean forward and you get the same kind of change in angle, and you don't have to buy anything.
Okay.
Even better, though, is to eat a diet packed with so much high fiber foods like legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils, whole grains, that you pass effortless stools and really treat the cause.
Things just slip out, let's say. So eat your greens and get your plants in, I guess. Thank you so much, Dr. Gregor, for making time for us again today. It's been a pleasure. You're a great person to interview. Your answers are short, sharp, to the point, and bring in a lot of knowledge. So we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us again today.
Looking forward to coming back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gregor. Thanks. And we're looking forward to hearing about the sumac.
Sumac data coming up.
Lovely, jubbly. Thank you so much.